Welcome to Weather and Earth 25. I am your host, Fire Rat, and also the creator of this special video that you're about to see. Here we're going to have a look at what could happen during the remainder of the 2020 hurricane season, which is from now in August, late August, through the end of November. This includes as well the most important part of hurricane season, which is actually late August through October. So far, it's already been a very active year, and things point to this actually being a very, very active year in the end. For those looking for a short answer, it would simply be 2020 will go down as one of the most busy, hyperactive seasons on record, which will probably feature anywhere between 19 and 25 total named storms, of which 8 to 11 will be hurricanes and possibly about 6 major hurricanes. Many of these storms will also make landfall, and probably more than one major hurricane will strike either the islands in the Caribbean or the southeastern U.S. and Gulf Coast. How did I come up with these predictions? Well, if you've seen my other videos, I usually use numerology and Chinese astrology to find out which dates could have major natural events. This is different from what meteorologists do, where they look at weather conditions, including sea surface temperatures and general upper air steering patterns. I look at the same stuff, but I add a twist with this astrology to see if I find any kind of pattern. And the fact is, there is a bit of a pattern, because in the Chinese zodiac there are 12 animal signs and 5 elements. This would yield a cycle of 12 years and 60 years, and as you're about to see in the minutes ahead, there is a correlation at hand. And 2020 might repeat with this 12-year, 60-year cycle, which indicates a potentially very active and destructive hurricane season. I actually dared to make this YouTube video because I feel it's time considering how things are looking. But in reality, I've been making this prediction since April. I'm a member of a very interesting weather forum called storm2k.org. And I'm actually going to provide a link to that prediction I made back in April here in the comments section and maybe other parts of this video. So you guys can go ahead and have a look. In that written prediction of mine, you will find even more details than I'm giving in this video. This is more of a general look at what might be coming next. But yeah, my friends, without much further ado, let's proceed with this video content and take a look at what 2020 might have in store. Alright guys, so in Chinese astrology, the year 2020 is the year of the rat. And this is an animal sign that repeats every 12 years, just like every other Chinese astrology sign. Here's an image that shows how the different years correspond to different signs. These are basically past years of each animal sign. So after the rat comes the ox, then comes the tiger, and so on. And it's a cycle that repeats every 12 years. And here, before 2020, we can go back to 2008, 1996, 1984, 1972, and so on. They were all the same year of the rat. This is very important because this could give us an idea of how the hurricane season is going to behave, believe it or not. Because I've actually gone back through the records to see how hurricanes have occurred in the year of the rat in the past, dating all the way back to the 18th century, basically as far back as reliable records can go. Here's an example of how the year of the rats have changed over time. They all start in January and February, with this current one having started on January 25th and ending in February 11th of next year, 2021. As you can see, according to this, the year of the rat before this one was 2008. Before that, 1996. And then so on, 12 years down the line. Now, with this in mind, I'm about to show you something really, really interesting. Behold what has happened in the last 20 or 21 years of the rat, dating all the way back to 1768. This right here, everybody, is a chart that I've made to show the tracks that different significant hurricanes have taken during the years of the rat, dating back all the way to 1768. The colors indicate also the element of the year of the rat in which this occurred. Going back to what I said at the very beginning of the video, aside from the 12-year cycle that repeats every Chinese astrology year, there's also a 60-year cycle. And the 60 is a result of the 5 different elements, meaning that every time a year of the rat comes around, it progresses from one element to the next until it returns back to that same element. With 5 different elements, we have 60 possible outcomes. 5 elements times 12 animal signs. In this case, the rat year repeats every 12 years, and with the 5 elements, that's a 60-year cycle right there. Either way you slice it, you can see where these storms have taken tracks and where they have occurred, and even the month in which they have struck. The X marks the spot where the hurricane hit with a significant impact. All but one of these tracks corresponds to at least a Category 2 hurricane or greater. The reason for that is because the only Category 1 I'm counting in there was responsible for a very deadly flood disaster back in 1972. But the grand majority of these storms were actually monsters, Category 3s, 4s, and even 5s. And as you can see, most of them have taken tracks that have landed them in the islands of the Caribbean, southern Florida, and even spread along the Gulf of Mexico and another cluster off the Carolinas and in the Carolinas. At the same time, areas like Central America, Mexico, and the northeastern United States seem to have been a little bit luckier, at least from not getting hit by a major hurricane or a significant impact. Another thing to note, a very interesting thing at that, is that even though we have looked back all the way to 1768, we're only looking at the year of the rat here. So in reality, it's the year 1768 through 2008, which was the last year of the rat, divided by 12. This yields about 20 or 21 years of data in reality. 20 or 21 years of the rat that have passed since 1768 to the present. So this crazy map with all these tracks showing all these massive, powerful, devastating hurricane landfalls denoted by the letter X over the spot where they hit, is only about 20 years worth of data. If I were to tell you this was the past 20 years of hurricane landfalls, this would look bad. This is really, really anomalous. You can't say that about any given 20-year time intervals. But yep, the year of the rat allowed me to make this graph and show you guys just how busy they can be for certain parts of the Atlantic. Now, we can actually strip away some of these lines and actually go a little further in depth to what 2020 is. And we can actually see that 2020 might be in a league of its own. Behold 2020, the year of the metal rat. So looking at 2020, the year of the metal rat, I can say one thing. This is part of the 60-year cycle at play. Here's a list, a little image actually, a little graphic showing you the past years of the rat from 1900 to this year and even going on to next year. And here I've put black rectangles around the years corresponding to the metal rat. The metal rat year is this year, then you go back all the way to 1960, then all the way back to 1900. Every 60 years, counting backwards from this year. Now, the next graphic here shows you the same, more or less the same tracks from the other map, but only focusing on those that happened in the year of the metal rat. And since I have less lines to show here, I can actually give you an idea of how intense these hurricanes were. Okay, so stripping away all the spaghetti from the other chart showing you all the tracks of the year of the rat hurricanes, these are the ones that have happened particularly in the year of the metal rat. Since I have more room to draw here, I've actually drawn the tracks much more closer to exact reality, following the data that's available of how these storms progressed and which tracks they took, as well as how intense they were when they hit land. As you can see here, we're looking at the past metal rat years of 1780, 1900, and 1960. There's another metal rat year in between those, which is the year of 1840, but that one did not have any significant landfalls and is kind of like the outlier. Only one out of those past four metal rat years had a significant hurricane landfall. So the majority of metal rat years in the past have had major hurricanes hitting land. So let's go back in time to 1960. September of that year, a strong hurricane named Donna formed all the way out of the Atlantic, made its track towards the islands, but passed just north of Puerto Rico and the Lesser Antilles before becoming a powerful Category 4 that went into the Bahamas, slowed down a little bit, hit South Florida as a major Category 4 hurricane right in the northern Keys, and then curved up the eastern coast of the U.S., bringing Category 1 to 2 hurricane force winds all the way up to right about North Carolina to Virginia and maybe even parts of the Northeast. Worst impacts from Donna were in Florida and the Bahamas. We go back 60 more years. Now here's where things really start getting ominous. In 1900, around the same time in September, another storm formed really close to where 1960's Donna did, but this one stayed relatively weak, going through the islands into Hispaniola, into Cuba, and then entered the Gulf of Mexico, where it finally became a hurricane. Once it entered the Gulf of Mexico, this hurricane became strong really fast and actually became the most deadly natural disaster in U.S. history. The hurricane became known as the Great Galveston Hurricane and struck Galveston, Texas as a Category 4 that September of 1900. 8,000 to 12,000 lives were lost. This is kind of scary, guys, assuming that we're talking about the metal rat year and seeing how the the patterns are. It's not really looking very good. Now, 1960 and 1900 were actually fairly slow hurricane seasons, and they still managed to squeeze out some really devastating storms. 2020 is much busier already and is looking to be a lot busier than those 2 years were. We are currently in a very active era for tropical storms and hurricanes in in the Atlantic and around the world. So, meteorologically speaking, we're not in the exact same boat as 1900 and 1960. However, I have a feeling that we might be in a similar situation as the next year I'm about to talk to you, which is on this map and is fairly obvious. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. 1780. 1780 was one of those seasons that just made their mark in such a way that they've become a legend. It's actually considered to be the worst hurricane season in the Atlantic of all time, going back to as far as there's ever any records of anything happening. Back in those days, in the 18th century and centuries before that, the only way we would know a hurricane even happened was based on accounts, based on the fact that they actually struck somewhere and were bad enough to be recorded. 1780 had at least 5 such hurricanes. The first one happened in June and struck the islands in the leewards and into the early Greater Antilles, followed by another storm, a very powerful hurricane that entered the Gulf of Mexico in late August of that year. This one went on to hit Louisiana around New Orleans as an estimated Category 4. But it didn't end there. We don't know if September had a lot of activity, but October is when the big ones came. 3 major devastating hurricanes tore through the Atlantic in October. The first one developed in the Eastern Caribbean and went on to strike Jamaica at peak intensity, likely as a low-end Category 5, before heading straight north into eastern Cuba and out to sea. It struck a place known as Savannah Lamar and claimed over 2,000 lives, destroying everything in its path. Only a week later, the greatest storm of all time, known as the Great Hurricane, developed east of the Lesser Antilles, reached Category 5, most likely, and at that intensity went over the islands. It struck Barbados and many of the other islands of the Lesser Antilles on the way to Puerto Rico at maximum intensity. Based on accounts, forts were destroyed, trees were debarked, cannons were flung through the air for hundreds of feet, heavy cannons, mind you, and 22,000 lives were lost. That storm is just in a league of its own. But eerily reminiscent is the death toll compared to what happened in 1900. So you could even see there's a pattern from 1900 and 1780. Deadly, deadly major hurricanes. And it didn't end there. A third nasty storm took shape in late October in the Western Caribbean, and it went into the eastern Gulf of Mexico, sinking a fleet of ships, killing thousands of sailors as well. That storm was probably around the Category 3. So here you have it, guys. This is what happened in the last 4 years of the metal rat. 1780, 1840, 1900, and 1960. If I was to tell you that this is any 4-year period in the past, you'd be looking at this with a lot of respect, and you'd be thinking, wow, that was a crazy time. Well, this could give us clues to how 2020 could behave. So with all this in mind, let's take a look and see what the rest of this hurricane season might actually do. Alrighty, folks. So based on the stuff that I've shown you this far, it's time for me to try to make a prediction for what may be coming during the rest of the 2020 hurricane season. The part of the season that matters the most, when we could actually see the strongest hurricanes. I actually made this chart and this graphic back in April when I actually posted my predictions for 2020 in a really good weather forum known as Storm 2K. I'm actually going to give you guys the link in the comments section and maybe somewhere else on the description part of the video so you guys can see that prediction for yourself that I made where I give even more details and stuff like that if you guys want to see that. So I've been thinking about this even before the hurricane season began, but now I just felt the need to share this because of the way things are going. I think, we're looking at a very, very dangerous hurricane season about to really get cranking. 1780 style, unfortunately. These are the tracks I'm thinking right here, and they more or less basically just align with all that you have seen thus far. I'm taking basically a blended approach of the tracks that we saw during the metal rat years of the past and averaged it with the other rat years of the past. By doing so, I can tell you, in my opinion, the most likely parts to get struck by a major hurricane or at least a significant hurricane this year are the Leeward Islands, most of the Caribbean islands, with an emphasis on the Turks and Caicos of the Bahamas, western Cuba, southern Florida. That corridor right there is at greatest risk in my opinion. So those are denoted by the red squares or rectangles. But the yellow ones are also what I consider medium risk. Red being high risk, medium being yellow. These yellow boxes or rectangles also extend to the northern Gulf Coast and also the western Gulf Coast. So basically from around, the Texas coast to like Louisiana to the panhandle of Florida. I think that's a very likely place for also seeing some hurricanes making landfall this year, basing it on what happened in 1900 in Galveston and 1780 with that August hurricane that went into Louisiana. Also, the Carolinas are at play just because so many years of the rat have brought hurricanes that way. But also, thinking about 1960s Hurricane Don, we could see a storm take shape that goes just north of the islands, hits the Bahamas, hits South Florida, or gets really close to South Florida, turns north and hits the Carolina coast. But yeah, the Caribbean islands are definitely the ones in the highest risk. Most of the 1780 hurricanes come to mind. The way they struck land on the Leeward Islands, and also Cuba. Not to mention how in other years of the rat, Cuba has basically been like the bullseye. So I would definitely not be surprised if at least one or two hurricanes made landfall in western Cuba this year. I gave some dates as well, or months rather, to where I think these could happen. But most of the August and September storms will come from the east, probably hit the islands or come just north of the islands towards the Bahamas. But then from September into October, expect the Caribbean to really start lining up. And then we can have trouble happening in western Cuba and southern Florida. I will not rule out a September storm making it into the Gulf of Mexico and striking Texas or Louisiana, or vice versa, hitting the islands and then going north towards the Carolinas. But basically, the land areas are at play here. This does not seem like one of those years where most of the hurricanes will miss land. It'll be quite the contrary. I'm afraid we're looking at a repeat of 2017, which is the most recent year that I can think of that can have that kind of level of activity. And in case you guys don't remember, 2017 was the year of Hurricane Irma and Maria and Harvey. So it's about to get cranking, folks. This year means business. This year means business. And these are my predictions for 2020's hurricane season. Okay, so taking from the last graphic showing where we might see the tracks going and what areas might be at highest risk, now we can go ahead and see how the rest of the season could be. Through the 18th of this month, we've gotten up to the 10th named storm and the 11th. So the 12th storm onwards is still coming. We'll probably have Laura and Marco very soon. So that'll be the 12th and 13th system. Since we might go all the way up to 25 named systems, that's up to 13 extra storms we could see starting from now. So about by August 25th onwards, we're probably going to be looking at these two storms plus future activity. On the lower end of the spectrum, if we were with 19 names, we're probably going to have about 8 more storms to come. I have a feeling it might be more towards the 25 than the 19, to be honest, in this prediction. My original prediction was for 19 names that I made back in April in the forum. But this time, after all the crazy pace that we've seen so far with names and stuff, I'm thinking we're going to reach the Greek alphabet sometime in October or November, which might still continue being very busy months. Unusually busy late season for this year, I think it's in store. That's why I think through November 25th we might see a lot of activity in the tropics. This map right here is a little more specific. It shows, where we might see the risks for these hurricanes to hit, and also what we have seen so far this season plus what might be to come in different colors, yielding the total of the named storms. And even what I call ACE, well, what meteorologists really call ACE, which is accumulated cyclone energy, which is another way to see a season and measure how busy it is. It basically takes into account how many hurricane days we have in the season and how strong the hurricanes are. So the ACE value is actually much higher than what should normally happen in the season, which is 100. I'm thinking we might be somewhere between 180 and 225, which is about as powerful as the 2004 and 2017 hurricane season. Only 2005 was higher than this. So, and 1933 for that matter. So there you have it. That's how 2020's hurricane season will likely continue. Buckle up, people, because as you have seen, this year has big time potential.